We want to reconvene, and now the next item on the agenda is the public hearing to solicit input on the proposed FY 2020-2021 annual financial plan. Mr. Chris Sorensen, our Chief Financial Officer, will share some information before we proceed. Mr. Sorensen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. So I actually have some additional information as discussed during the work session with Ms. Atkins. Her constituents turned in some questions, and I'd like to take a few minutes to go through those answers, if that's okay now. All right. So one of the questions was, what's the budget process? So this is just a brief chart to show what the budget process is. The budget process is fluid. I've told you guys before, we take information year-round. So just because it says we develop between October and December, we'll still take comments before that. But we're always collecting emails. We're always gathering information from meetings we have with staff to understand what the needs are in the division going forward. But as a formal timeline, we do development in the fall of each year, so the slide indicates October through December. We're really working internally with our staff, again, to get the base budget straight, to understand what we need to do, adjustments, one-time things to add in, one-time things to take out, really getting the base budget straight to move forward as we go into the balancing part, December through January. So that's really when we look at our compensation in more depth. We really start to nail down those operating budgets to really get a firm base. The compensation is critically important. You guys know that compensation is most of our budget, about 85% of our budget. So if we don't get that right, we have problems going in. So we spend a lot of time taking care of the compensation. So really up until around winter break, we get real heavy in it. First part of January, we're preparing for the superintendent's final recommendation to come before you guys. In February, this year, January 30th, she presented. So in February, we distributed the information, posted online, had everything set for the public to get input leading up to this point in the process for the public hearing. You guys, of course, had a work session tonight, and we're getting ready to turn the budget over when you guys act on it later on this month to approve it. We'll send it over to the budget, to the county, and in March, the county manager will include it in his budget before the Board of Supervisors. They'll take action on that budget in April, and it'll come back to you all in May to finalize the budget. So again, the budget process is fluid, but that's just a more formalized outline of it. So the schools, where the resources for school budgets come from, we do allocate funds to schools on a per pupil basis. So elementary is $40.16, middle school is $42.20, and high school is also $42.20. So those are the day-to-day operating supplies for schools. And then you see a note at the bottom that there's also some extra money for equipment at the secondary level. And we also provide equipment money to the ACE centers in the academy, Virginia Randolph. How do we utilize grants? So grants is a huge portion of our budget. It's about $57 million. This slide indicates some of the primary grants. Grants are used for specific purposes. So it's important if we get a grant, we follow the rules very closely. That's why we account for those in separate funds, because we're going to get audited, particularly if it's a federal grant. We want to make sure we have all the revenue recorded in the right lines and the expenditures to make sure we're in compliance with those grants. We rely on those grants a lot. They're very beneficial to our students. So it's important that we account for them properly. So Virginia Preschool Initiative is a large grant we have. And then Title I, which really focuses on our schools with higher levels of poverty. Title 6B is exceptional education, and then Head Starts for preschool. Just some of the dollar amounts I mentioned on the last slide, that we get about $57 million in grants. So there are different kinds. There's state grants, that's VPI that I just mentioned. Department of Medical Services is our Medicaid funding. There's a new grant, I think I indicated when we presented our budget to you. It's a special education regional classroom that is for our special education students. That's a new grant that the state is giving out to more school divisions. And then you can see some of the areas on there as well: technology, advanced college academy, career and technical. So that's the state side. That's about $18.7 million. Federal government, we get about $29 million. Title I is a large grant, Title 6B, and Head Start. And then we have other grants, so others are a broad category, because we're always looking for grant opportunities for our students. Organizations will come out with grants for certain programs, and of course we want to get those grant funds if we can. Actually, the largest pieces of the others, we have a reserve for revenue. So because we are getting grants all the time, we have a reserve. All grants come to you for approval, but we have a reserve so that we don't need to increase our appropriation all the time. It's a time process involved with that. We have to go to the Board of Supervisors. It delays actually getting funding out to the schools. So we have a reserve for revenue built into our budget to allow us to manage the grants and get money out to schools a little bit quicker. So what goes in the general fund? General fund is basically, it wouldn't be the grants. So all the things I went through, those are not in the general fund, they're in special revenue funds. But it's really local tax dollars and state funding, some of the fees we charge. That really goes into the general fund. We focus a lot on the general fund. That's really what we operate all of our schools, the day-to-day operating expenses. So the general fund, as you can see by that chart, those are the four funds we have. The general fund is by far the largest at 81% of our operating budget. Then there's the state and federal grants I just talked about. That's 8.8% of our operating budget. School nutrition is a standalone, self-sufficient fund at $23.7 million. And debt service, that's to pay back all the bonds we've issued over the years for our larger construction projects. Then sports and music. So these are the items for sports and music that we have. You can see music's about $430,000. This does not include staffing. It's just the operating piece. And you all had before you in the superintendent's recommended budget $120,000 for middle school equipment in the 2021 budget. And that's primarily for safety equipment. So the major influences, we talked about, if you remember, we talked about in the budget presentation how we aligned all of our initiatives to our cornerstones. So the cornerstones do truly drive the process along with the strategic plan. But we also pay attention to other things along the way. Compensation, talked about earlier, Ms. Kinsella asked a question about the budget. So $9 million already is in our budget for compensation. We're certainly hopeful we'll get more from the county to address some of that. So compensation is always an important item to the board and to the superintendent for our budget. DOE, of course, has different guidelines and mandates, staffing guidelines, different things we have to do. So we always pay attention to what DOE has for us to make sure we're in compliance with our budget. And then, of course, services for our students are important. We talked about this budget includes money for additional social workers, psychologists, counselors, all types of services for our students that we're always paying attention to understand their needs so the budget is responsive to that. So, Ms. Atkins, those are the questions you presented. I hope they provide the answers that you were looking for and answer the questions of your constituents. We have posted that on board docs, so it's available. And of course, we're always available to answer additional questions and give guidance to folks that have questions for us.
So thank you very much for doing that. And for those that are watching, if there are other questions around the budget, I would encourage you to continue to ask. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. And can we do the other presentation? Wouldn't be complete without a pie chart, so I just have a pie chart real quick. I want to run through a couple slides. So again, this is the entire budget before you for the public hearing tonight. It is $656.5 million. It's a $24 million increase, or 3.9% over the FY20 adopted budget. We went through these. This is the general fund budget. This before you for consideration that folks will be commenting on tonight. And this is our revenue. The revenue right now, we kind of a holding spot for the targeted increase. We'll update those numbers when the county adopts their budget later on in the spring. And I did want to get to the next steps. It's really the primary reason for going to this. It is February 13th. It's the public hearing. You guys will approve the budget or be before approval on the 27th. Then it goes to the county. The county will have a public hearing on April 14th, so folks that could not make it tonight have an opportunity to speak at the county's budget hearing on April 14th at the County Government Center. The County Board of Supervisors will act on it on April 28th, comes back to you on May 14th, and then it will be effective July 1st. So with that as an introduction, I'll answer any questions, and then we'll turn it over to the public hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Sorensen, for your presentation. Board members, do you have any questions for Mr. Sorensen? All right. That being said, we want to move now into the public hearing segment of our meeting. Some citizens may have signed up in advance, and we're going to follow that list first and then allow anyone else who's present and wishes to speak to come to the podium to do so after we have completed the list. We have a few things that we ask. We ask that each speaker come to the microphone and clearly state your name, your neighborhood, or your school affiliation. Once you have finished speaking, if you did not sign up in advance, we ask that you write your name and contact information on the sign-in form located on the table behind the microphone to my right. To assist you in tracking your time, there's a timekeeping system on the podium. Speakers will have a 4-minute time limit. The light will be green as you begin your remarks. The yellow light means you have 1 minute remaining. And we ask that you stop speaking when the light turns red. The school board is here tonight to hear from you, the community. Speakers should speak directly to us, the board. We will not, unfortunately, be responding to speakers, but we will carefully and consciously consider your comments regarding the annual financial plan. Again, from my peers to you, we appreciate your attendance here this evening and providing your input. We do not have anyone who is signed up in advance to speak to the board, but if you are here and you would like to address us, we ask that you'll come up front now. When the first person's speaking, we ask that you'll sit on the front row and we'll take comments from any persons present.
Good evening. I'm Ernestine Hicks, and I live in Verina. And my children go to Verina Elementary School. And I'm looking at, with your budget, is it possible for them to have an upgrade on their gym with paint? I mean, we even have parents that's volunteering to donate paint just to give the gym an upgrade. Can that happen in the budget?
Well, we won't be responding to you.
Oh.
But, I'm sorry. But what we will do is take under advisement your suggestion. Dr. Cashel and her staff will look, we'll see what we can do to accommodate suggestions in the budget.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. You mind signing up? Thank you. Give us your contact. Thank you so much. Anyone else like to say? If you leave your information, staff will be in touch with you concerning your comment. Please, everyone, don't run up at once. All right, Madam Chair, I'm saying is that we have no more comments. Madam Superintendent, I'm sorry, I keep going, Chair. I'm sorry. All right. Well, next I want to announce our upcoming meetings. February 27th, 2020, 2 p.m. work session, 6:30 p.m. monthly meeting, New Bridge Learning Center Auditorium. And I also want to make the listening audience aware that meeting times may be adjusted if needed. If there are no more comments, this meeting is adjourned.